Have you ever watched someone else's life unfold? The job, the person, the timing that seemed to line up just right for them, and quietly wondered what you did wrong to deserve less of that? We're not here to tell you that feeling isn't real. It is. But what if the thing you've been calling bad luck was never really about luck at all? Welcome back to Slow Down with Brenda. We want to sit with something today, something that might change the way you look at your own life, quietly, without needing to change anything about it right away. There's a difference between the things that happen to us and the things we build without even noticing we're building them. Most of us have never really separated those two. We use the same word, luck, for both. Bad luck, good luck, luck of the draw. And because we use one word for two very different things, we end up believing something that isn't quite true. We start believing that our lives are simply happening to us, that some people got a better hand and we didn't, and there's nothing much to do about that except wait and hope. We want to gently pull those two things apart today, because some parts of life really are outside our hands. Where we were born, the family we grew up in, a diagnosis nobody asked for, a door that closed before we even knew it existed. Those things are real, and they're not fair, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. But there's another layer underneath all of that, quieter, easy to miss. It's the version of us that shows up, or doesn't. The conversation we start, or the one we let pass because it felt safer not to. The small risk we take, or the one we talk ourselves out of 3 or 4 times until it stops even feeling like a choice. We've all done that, told ourselves some version of, it just wasn't meant to be, when really, we just didn't reach for it. That's not a failure. It's not even really about willpower. It's just something worth noticing. Because here's the part that tends to surprise people the most. The things we chalk up to good luck usually have a quieter story underneath them, one we don't always see at the time. Somebody said yes to something a little uncomfortable. Somebody sent the message they weren't sure they should send. Somebody stayed in the room a few minutes longer than they wanted to, just to see what might happen next. None of that guarantees anything, but it opens something. And that little opening is usually where the whole story actually begins. So maybe the real question isn't why good things don't happen to us. Maybe it's this. What door have we been standing in front of this whole time without realizing our hand was already resting on the handle? We think about it a little like this. Picture opportunity as something moving through the air around us all the time, like wind. Most days, we don't even feel it. We're inside our own heads, going through our routines, and it just passes by without us noticing. Some of us catch a glimpse of it. We feel it brush past, think, that could have been something, and then go right back to what we were doing. And every once in a while, someone catches it, not because they're braver or smarter or more deserving than the rest of us, just because in that one moment, something in them happened to be open, a hand extended instead of pulled back, a question asked instead of swallowed, a small yes where there usually would have been a quiet no. That's really all luck tends to be most of the time, not lightning, just a moment where we happened to be a little more open than usual. And if that's true, then maybe the story we've been telling ourselves about being unlucky isn't finished yet. Maybe it's just waiting for us to notice where the wind has been blowing all along. So we've been sitting with that difference, the things that happen to us and the things we quietly build. And once you start seeing it, it's hard to unsee, because most of us grew up hearing luck talked about like it's one single thing. You either have it or you don't. Some people are just born under a good sign, and some people just aren't, and that's supposed to explain everything from the job someone landed to the person they married. But that explanation never really held up, did it? If it did, we'd all be equally stuck or equally free. And we're clearly not. So here's a distinction that might be worth borrowing. There's fortune, the things that arrive at our doorstep without an invitation. And there's luck, the version we quietly shape, decision by decision, so often that we forget we're even shaping it. Fortune is where we were born, the body we live in, the family that raised us, for better or worse, a layoff that had nothing to do with our work, an illness nobody asked for, a moment that simply happened before we were old enough or ready enough to have any say in it. We're not going to pretend those things don't matter. They do, deeply. And for a lot of people listening right now, those things have shaped entire decades of a life in ways that weren't chosen and weren't earned. But underneath fortune, there's this other layer. The one we tend to overlook because it's so much quieter than the big, obvious things. It's the version of us that responds. Maybe you've had a stretch of life where everything felt unfair, and somewhere in that, you had a choice, a small one, easy to miss, about how you were going to carry it. Not whether it hurt, it did, but whether you let it close every door behind it, or whether you kept one hand near the handle just in case. That's the part we call luck. Not the hand we were dealt, the way we play the few cards that are actually ours. And here's where it gets interesting, because most of us do something a little sneaky with the word luck without even realizing it. We use it to explain away the good things we were actually part of creating. Think about it. Someone gets a great opportunity and they say, "I got lucky." Someone builds a friendship that changes their life and they say, "We just happened to meet at the right time." There's a kind of humility in that, and it's not wrong exactly, but underneath it, there's usually a version of events we're skipping over. The version where they said yes to the coffee, where they showed up to the thing they almost canceled, where they asked one more question instead of letting the conversation end. We call it luck because it feels too small to call it anything else. But small is exactly what most of it looks like in real time. And here's the flip side of that same habit. We do it with the hard things too, just in reverse. We tell ourselves we're unlucky, when really, some of what happened was a door we walked past without noticing it was there. Not because we're careless, because most of us were never taught to look for it. We're not saying every hard season is a missed opportunity in disguise. That would be unkind, and it wouldn't be true. Some things are just hard, full stop. But maybe some of them aren't quite as closed as they've felt. Maybe some of what we've been quietly grieving as bad luck was actually a moment where we could have reached out and didn't. Not because we were wrong to hold back, just because nobody ever showed us there was something to reach for. That's really the whole point of pulling these two words apart, not to make anyone feel responsible for things that were never theirs to control. Just to leave a little room for the parts that were. Because once you can see the difference between what happened to you and what you quietly do with it, something starts to shift. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough to notice that some of the story is still being written, and some of that pen is still in your hand. So if some of that pen really is still in our hand, the next question is worth asking. What are we actually writing with it? Because before any of us can catch the wind that's already moving around us, there's something quieter that has to happen first. Something most people skip, not because they don't care, but because it doesn't feel urgent. It doesn't feel like progress. We have to know what we're actually building underneath everything else we're doing. Think of it like a boat. Not the sail, not the direction, just the boat itself. The part that keeps us steady when the water gets rough, and honest when something tempting drifts by that isn't really ours to take. And what that boat is made of, more than anything, is what we actually value. Not the version we'd say out loud in an interview, the real one. The one that shows up in the small yeses and the small nos we give every single day, usually without thinking about it at all. Here's the thing about values, though. Most of us have never actually sat down and named ours. We just assume we know. And then life asks a question we weren't prepared for, and we find out, in real time, what we actually believe. We think of someone we'll call Anna. Nothing dramatic about her story, just familiar. Early in her career, her manager asked her to do something small. Present someone else's work as her own in a meeting, just this once, just to make the team look good in front of a client. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even that unusual, the way these things get framed. And Anna said yes. Not because she wanted to, because he was her boss and she was new, and it felt easier to go along with it than to ask the questions sitting in the back of her mind. She got through the meeting fine. Nobody noticed anything. But she noticed. She carried that meeting around for weeks, this strange, low hum of discomfort she couldn't quite name. It wasn't guilt about getting caught. Nobody caught her. It was something quieter. The sense that she'd let something small slip without even deciding to. That's usually how it starts, not with a dramatic betrayal of who we are, with a small, easy yes to something we hadn't actually thought through. If you want to weigh into this for yourself, it doesn't have to be complicated. Just ask, the last time you said yes to something you didn't really want, what was underneath that yes? Was it wanting to keep the peace? Wanting to be liked? Not wanting to let someone down? There's usually an answer if we're willing to sit with the question for more than a few seconds. And a second one, just as quiet. Think of something you said no to, even though part of you wanted to say yes. What were you protecting in that moment? Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's something worth protecting. The two can look almost identical from the outside. We're not telling you Anna's story to make you feel bad about a version of it you might recognize in yourself. Every one of us has a moment like hers. The point isn't the mistake. The point is what happens after, whether we go back and actually name the thing we wish we'd said, or whether we just let it blur into the background and repeat it again, a little more easily the next time. Because that's the part worth sitting with. Once we know what actually matters to us, not in theory, but in the specific, practical Tuesday afternoon sense, something changes. We stop getting quietly pulled into things that don't fit us. We stop mistaking easier for right. There's a second piece to building this boat, and it's just as easy to overlook. It's the story we've been carrying about who we are. Maybe somewhere along the way, you picked up a version of your own story that sounds like, "Things don't really work out for me," or "I'm not the kind of person things happen for." And once that story settles in, it starts doing something sneaky. It filters what we notice. We walk right past small openings because we've already decided how this particular story ends. We're not saying to force yourself into blind optimism. That's its own kind of pressure, and it rarely holds up under real weight. We're asking something smaller. Is that story still true? Or is it just the oldest one you happen to know, the one you've repeated so many times it started to feel like fact instead of habit? Because here's what tends to happen once someone starts questioning that story, even a little. They don't become a different person overnight. Nothing about their circumstances changes right away. But they start noticing things they used to walk past. A conversation worth having. A small risk that used to feel too big and suddenly feels a little more possible. That's the boat. Not something loud, not something anyone else can see from the outside. Just a quieter kind of steadiness, built one honest answer at a time. What do I actually value? And what story have I been carrying without ever checking if it's still mine? Because once that part is in place, something else becomes possible. We stop doing this alone. Once we know what we're standing on, there's something else worth noticing. None of this happens in isolation. Not really. We like to imagine that building a life is a solo project, that if we just get our own values straight, our own stories sorted, the rest will follow on its own. But most of the good things that come our way, if we trace them back far enough, usually have someone else's fingerprints on them somewhere. A person who said yes when they didn't have to. A person who mentioned our name in a room we weren't in. A person who remembered something small about us and brought it up again weeks later like it mattered. That's not luck showing up out of nowhere. That's the second part of the boat, the crew. And here's what's easy to miss about this part. We tend to wait. We wait for someone to notice us first, to reach out first, to be generous first, before we're willing to offer any of that ourselves. But it tends to work the other way. Think about the last time someone did something small for you, introduced you to someone, recommended you for something you didn't even ask about, simply used your name in a way that told you they'd actually been listening. Chances are, It stayed with you far longer than something that small should have. That's the part so many of us forget when we're waiting for our own luck to change. We're watching the door, hoping someone opens it for us, when the far more reliable move is to be the one who opens it for somebody else first. Not because it guarantees anything comes back. It doesn't, not directly, not on a schedule. But something quieter happens when we start being generous before we feel like we have anything to spare. We stop keeping score. We stop treating every interaction like a transaction we need to win. And people notice that, even if they couldn't tell you exactly why they trust us a little more because of it. Maybe it's as small as this. Someone you haven't thanked in a while for something that actually mattered. A message you've been meaning to send just to say you were thinking of them. A colleague's work you could mention to someone else with nothing in it for you. None of that feels like much in the moment, but most of the people who seem to have good things follow them around are usually doing exactly this, quietly, long before anyone's watching. Not because they're keeping a ledger, because somewhere along the way, they stopped waiting for permission to be generous first. We're not saying kindness is a strategy. It stops working the moment it starts feeling like one. We're saying something simpler. The version of us that shows up for other people without needing anything back right away tends to be the version other people show up for too. Not always in a straight line, not always when we're watching, but it comes back, usually in a shape we didn't expect, from a direction we weren't looking. And once that starts happening, even quietly, we stop feeling like we're doing this alone. We start to notice we never really were. So where does that leave us? Not with a 5-year plan, not with some big overhaul of who we are or how we live, just with something much smaller. And honestly, smaller is the point. Because everything we've talked about today, the difference between what happens to us and what we build, the values underneath our choices, the story we've been carrying, the quiet generosity that comes back around, none of it asks for a dramatic leap. It asks for one door. Just one. And if it helps to make that less abstract, here are a few shapes it might take. Maybe it's sending the thank you text you've been meaning to send for weeks. Not a vague one, but one that says exactly what the person did and why it mattered to you. Maybe it's introducing two people who should know each other with nothing in it for you. Maybe it's staying in a conversation 30 seconds longer than usual and asking one more question instead of letting it end where it always ends. None of those require courage, exactly. They just require doing the thing instead of thinking about the thing. It doesn't have to look like a leap. Most of the time, it won't. It'll look like a small, slightly uncomfortable yes in a week that's already asking a lot of you. That's enough. Because we're not trying to become someone completely different by Friday. We're just trying to notice where our hand has already been resting, on a door we assumed was locked. If you take one thing from today, let it be this. You are allowed to stop waiting for permission to be luckier. Not because you can control everything that happens to you. You can't, and neither can we. But because some of what you've been calling bad luck might just be a door you haven't tried yet. So this week, pick one. The text, the introduction, the extra question. Just one. Not because it guarantees anything, but because most of what we call luck was never lightning to begin with. It was just someone, on an ordinary day, a little more open than usual. That could be you this week.